Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wow Life, our weekly meeting with amazement and wonder at our little one's development. Today, we have a very special guest. I think you were the very first guest ever in a Wow Life, so it's
Oh,
fantastic.
wow. I didn't know that.
I think so. I was looking at that today, and I think you're really the first one in the middle of COVID. It's still in my old house. uh, it's actually 2 houses ago. So, yeah, it's fantastic to have you back. Evelyne Mercure, researcher at Goldsmith University, and she's come today to talk to us about language and, in particular, how to get our kids ready for school in that department. And yes, would you first of all like to tell us a little bit about you and how you came to study language in toddlers?
Yeah, sure. So my first background is into speech and language therapy. So this is what I studied as an undergraduate, and I really liked it. But then I perhaps made the mistake of finding an internship in a neuroscience lab when I was studying. And then I really fell in love with neuroscience. I wanted to understand the brain mechanism of language learning. And this is what I've been doing ever since. I never went back to practicing in speech and language therapy, but I always have this in my background, like this idea of stimulating language development and making sure that every little one is on a right path to success.
Yes, that sounds. When does that path begin? When do children start learning language? We've asked our audience, and quite a few said the first year of life, and even more so said during pregnancy. Is that true?
Yes, well, both of them are true. So that we learn different aspects at different phases of our life. Language is a very complex thing with multiple levels of complexity. It is true that language learning lays its foundation prenatally. So the last trimester of pregnancy, roughly, the baby can hear. And they can hear mostly what comes from within the mother's body because they're lying in amniotic fluid. So they're hearing our heart rate, our blood pressure, and all these things, but also our language. And from birth, we know that babies can recognize and prefer the language they were hearing in utero. And they also prefer the tone of their mother's voice compared to the voice of another woman. So it suggests that like the very basics is achieved prenatally. It's very much like sensitivity to rhythms in the language, some sensitivity to speech sounds. And then the rest of it builds a lot during the first year and then after.
It's interesting because when you have a newborn, you're not really thinking that is learning language right now, right? And yet in that first year there is so much. Somehow it seems that the attention switches to language towards the second half of the first year. But in the first half there is lots happening as well, right?
Yes, yeah, it's true. They don't seem like they're really perceiving the environment in that way. And they're probably not actively seeking that information or that learning at that age, but it's just sinking in. And they are actually, if you contrast language with other auditory sound, they will always choose language. They are very, very interested in human vocalization and human language. So this is the sound of other people of our species. So they are super interested in that from the very start. And they're starting to build that knowledge very slowly, but from the very beginning.
That's so exciting. And then, so from what age does it make sense to actually actively work with them and their language development or to be conscious of that?
Well, from the very start, like maybe not work, I would say play with language or expose them to language. And another aspect that is very important from the very start is communication, because communication, the desire for communication is really the fuel that will pull language learning forward throughout childhood. It is very much for this desire for communication that children learn the tools of language. Because at the very beginning, their communicative needs are very simple, right? They want to tell you, I'm comfortable or I'm not. And then crying or not crying is sufficient for this. But as they get older and older, they want to express something more complex, until like when they start nursery and they want to explain something fantastic that happened there and then when you were not around. And then it's not really possible to convey that without sophisticated language skills like words and sentences. So it is really that desire to communicate that will pull language development forward for the child. So from the very start, it's probably the most important thing to develop: the communication, the enjoyment of communication. And it starts really simple with a newborn. It starts with copying their facial expression. It starts with then simple games of turn taking, like I'm clapping my hands and I'm waiting for you to do the same. And it also continues with making a big thing of any single attempt for communication that the baby is making. So this could be eye contact. So the baby's looking at you, you're looking at them, and making this time special by smiling, by making it fun. Or the baby's babbling, you're babbling back, creating that mini conversation. And yes, so this development of communication is as important, if not more important, at the beginning as working on language itself.
This makes two things come to mind. One is the fact that there is a need for slowing down in a way for us to actually pay attention to those attempts of communication, to be present at them. Like the things that you have suggested don't seem extremely complicated, and they definitely don't feel like working, as you were saying. They feel like playing. Yet sometimes we forget because our schedules are so packed, and it can be schedules of things to do outside the house, but it can be also simply just filling the dishwasher, emptying the dishwasher, cleaning the floor. Like there is so much going on that sometimes we might tend to overlook the attempts to communication. And so it's a very clearly reminder for us that, let's push it back up to the priority list. It is important to spend time just staring at my child's eyes. Yes, it's good. It's a good investment.
And I think I'm not saying that to put like pressure on people to feel guilty whenever they're not doing this. It's not like you can't be in perfect interaction all the time that your baby's awake. It's not feasible to do that. But to find the time, sometimes by asking someone else to do the laundry for you, because you're doing this super important thing of being present with your baby in the moment and creating that bond, that communication moment that is really going to pay off later on. So it's really not about doing that all the time, but about like treasuring these moments and making the most of them when they do happen.
Yes. And the other thing that came to mind when you were talking about emphasizing communication is there is, of course, a minority of children that go on to develop speech problems or disabilities or anything. Communication, like learning to communicate with that person, is still gonna be the priority. Like it will pay off whatever your child is gonna do that with that, right? It's that relationship really between you and them, and how that plays out, and how it plays out, and how the loop of communication between you and them happens. And so it's really at the basis of language, but the basis of so many other things as well for the development of the child.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And this kind of, yeah, is related to our next question, which is how does language impact thinking and vice versa?
Yeah, so that is very interesting. There's a like you can't separate where language starts and where other aspects of cognition begin. So they're really they really go together. Like all aspects of cognition, like memory um, or auditory perception, everything is linked together, and they all develop together with language. I wanted to mention two very important aspects that language is really contributing to the development of other aspects of cognition. And one of them is the development of inner speech. So this is something like when you speak to yourself, when that really helps structure your mind, that really helps you, for example, to decompose the steps that you're going to take to achieve a goal. You can see that in toddlers sometimes, like it's not so inner speech, it's self speech, but like they sometimes
That's still
produce
fine.
that. But being able to reach that level of language tools that allows you to have then that tools to structure your mind, it's really something that really leverages your intellectual potential. And I'm saying that because to emphasize again the importance of language experience, language exposure, but also to say that it doesn't matter which language that is, right? So this language, this inner language, could be in a different language from the language you'll be using at school. That doesn't matter so much as long as it is there, as long as it is accessible. You can use it to structure your own mind. You can use it to then learn the language that you'll be using in school. So if parents feel more comfortable in a different language, it is fully productive to use that different language with the child, even though they're not going to use exactly that language in school. That language is really going to help your child to structure their thoughts and also learn English if they're going to go to school in English.
Yeah, yeah, it's
While
interesting.
yes,
No, it's interesting what you're saying because sometimes, I guess also if a parent would kind of force themselves to speak in another language because they think that's going to help my child more, you might end up talking less as a result because you're
yeah,
very self-conscious. You're kind of making a big effort of doing something educational for them, and which means that you're just gonna give up half of the times and kind of while maybe just free flowing and using language just to be in touch with your child and maybe vocalize the thinking process you're doing or things like that. It's best done in the language that comes completely natural to you, right?
yes, definitely. So any language you feel comfortable in will be fantastic experience for your child, even though this language is never going to be used in school or in professional life. It doesn't really matter because it's that strong language base on which the child can build up later on. And
Yeah.
if you, yes, so the choice should really be like which language do you feel like speaking, and that's the one that really you should go for.
Yeah, it's funny because it kind of touches a personal story. Like I grew up for the first 4 years of my life speaking a language. It's like a dialect that I never ever use anymore in my life. But that was basis enough to learn a lot of other languages on top of that and do all my thinking. So yeah, I can I can bring my testimonial from experience that it does work like that.
Yeah, even
Um,
if you've never used it after these 4 years, that language had a strong influence on you, and it was never a waste of time. And it was possibly also the language of love in your family, so the language that your parents felt comfortable in expressing love, and that is super important. So,
Yes.
for example, for me, in my personal experience, English is a language of work. I'm quite fluent in it, but I feel very awkward speaking to my kids in English. I do it when there are English speakers around, but we do it for like exchange of information. It's not for us a language of love. It's not the language of our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that leads me to the second aspect, the link between language and cognition. The second one is mentalizing. So, going back to the language of love, a language where you can express feelings, you can express thoughts, emotions, etc. So that is very important for the child's learning of theory of mind, understanding that other people's have thoughts, have feelings. They can be wrong, they can be misled. And that is also very important and very based on the language that the child learned at home. It can be in conversation, in expressing, oh, I'm feeling so cold at the moment, or I would like to do this because I think that. Or it can also be linked with book sharing. So, why do you think this character is acting in this way? What's the motivation for doing this? What is their understanding of the situation? So it is from all this discussion early on with the parents that children learn to understand, to read other people's minds, if I can say.
So basically, using our language to point to all the things that one cannot see, but they can kind of infer from the behavior of other people or thinking what's behind what I see. Is
Yes,
that all right?
exactly.
Yes. Hmm.
And from our adult understanding of human behavior, like people get angry for a reason. They behave in a certain way because they are angry. So this kind of adult understanding of human behavior that we make accessible for the child by explaining how we see the situation.
And this, yeah, as you were saying before, language is so linked into so many other aspects of cognition, but we can see how language really makes it possible for humankind to have things such as mediation, compromise, or role taking, and yeah, it all begins really very early for in the way us as parents speak to the children. Um, and it just seems when you see it like that, the impact that a devoted carer has on that one child, but even on society, is massive.
Yes, definitely understanding how we can, like in a relationship, respect our own needs and desires while respecting other people's needs and desire, creating like a situation where everybody's compromising. So it's the kind of thing that you can get to by understanding other people's mind and through language.
Yeah. Yeah, having the words to put all things into is just because it's difficult. A theory of mind is difficult. We kind of tend to expect it a lot from other people, and then until we realize that we are not that strong at doing it ourselves, putting ourselves in other people's shoes, taking on perspectives, and understanding what the thinking might be if I were in that other circumstances. It's there are steps, but it's not always easy, and especially when we're tired or yeah, yeah. So it's good to start practicing very early. Yeah. Um, and in terms of if we're thinking about toddlers that are getting ready to go to school, um, what is it that we can do? Like we were asking our audience, and they were there were quite a few people in favor of flashcards. Do you think flashcards are a good tool, or are there other tools? What do you think about that?
So I think before we can know what is really helpful, it really helps to understand like what kind of skills at school entry is going to predict good results in school, good achievements in school. These tend to be things like oral vocabulary. So, really, the understanding of oral language, the understanding of complex grammar, but like not the understanding of the rule, but the understanding that mom showed the cat the dog is not the same as mom showed the dog the cat. So, this subtle understanding of how we use language, what kind of meaning, how we can modify meaning by changing the word order. And then, of course, understanding of, as we said, mentalizing language. Can the child understand the flow of a story? Can they infer from what is said in the story what characters believe, what characters want to do, what is going to happen next? So these are the kind of skills at school entry that really make a difference. It's really not about knowing your letters. It's not about being able to recognize a word form. So this is the kind of things that will be learned in school. The teachers are very good at teaching that. That's what they are there for. What we can provide as parents is something that is a lot harder to evaluate or measure. So, for example, can the child recognize 10 flashcards? That's something that is easy to measure. What we can really provide as parents is a lot less tangible or easy to measure, a rich vocabulary, a rich understanding of oral language, and a rich understanding of the structure of a story or the motivation of the characters in them. So how can we build that? Through conversation. So in engaging is as much conversation as you can with the child. And here, by conversation, I mean really an exchange, not so much I'm teaching, you're listening. So if the conversation is driven by the child, they're a lot more likely to learn from it. So, for example, if the conversation is about something that the child is asking about, or something that the child is pointing to, something they're attending to, something they're interested in. So this is something that has a lot of impact. Another thing that has a lot of impact on language development is the level of the model that the parent is providing. So for a toddler, we say that the model the parent is providing should be slightly more complex than what the child is producing. So in that way, it is accessible to the child, but it is challenging. So the parents should do what we call scaffolding. So the child is making a statement, for example. It could be just cat, pointing at a cat. And then you're scaffolding that, providing just a little bit more for the child to be able to expand on this. So yes, it's a gray cat. Or yes, the cat is running. So just this little bit more information. And then if the child is producing a short sentence, you provide a little bit more information about it. So you're scaffolding to the next level.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It makes me think about a recent Wow Live that we had with Professor Samuas, and we were talking about completely different things, but there we were talking about emotional dysregulation, and there was this idea of getting the child there where they are and working with that. So in his case, it doesn't help if the child is all upset and I am very calm. There is a barrier there. I need to be a little bit upset myself to kind of catch him and then bring him down to kind of relaxing. And this seems similar. It doesn't help if I kind of give lecture with super wonderful words and very complex sentences to my child that is saying cat. But getting there and just a little bit more, that's where the sweet spot is. And what jumps to the eye is that you really need to know your child very well to know what to do about that. You need to have that feeling. You need to pay attention, basically, from the beginning, because these are things that keep developing as they grow, right?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of observation involved. So when you're talking with the child, making sure that they're leading the conversation, and that when you're providing information, that they're still with you. If they go off and do something else, that that often happens with toddler, but this is not a moment of learning.
Yeah.
So you need to work with trial and error, see what works, what doesn't. Like yesterday, I had this really beautiful scene in front of me. There was probably a grandmother with a baby in a pushchair, and the baby watched a leaf fall down, and you could see the big eyes following the leaf. And the grandmother saw that, and she stopped the pushchair. She picked the leaf from the ground. She showed it to the child, and she started talking about the leaf. And the child was smiling, was like really really focused on the leaf. Then she gave it to the child, let it touch the leaf, and then started talking about how the leaf felt. And I was thinking, these are moments of learning. It's driven by the child's attention on the leaf. And then the grandmother really took that opportunity to provide information, to provide experience with the information, to really anchor it in the child's experience. So I was thinking, this is the perfect moment of learning, and so this is what we should be attentive for, these moments that that the child is showing they're ready to learn something.
I have goosebumps. uh, and I was expecting maybe, yeah, exercises, repeat this and that word so and so many times. But no, that's not, no, I wasn't really expecting. But maybe when you think about preparing your child for school, you might get in that state of, oh, I need to get him academic. I need to kind of teach her to listen, to copy more, to kind of, and as you say, let's leave that job to teachers, and we have all the rich basis to provide on which all those skills can be developed.
Yes, and I think these are things that are harder to measure. Like, well, sometimes parents will say, like, "Oh, my child is 3 and they can read," and I'm thinking, yeah, that's fantastic. They've learned to decode. That this is great. But how about their vocabulary? How about their knowledge of the world? How about their understanding of a story? And with reading as well, it's not so much about how fast you get there at decoding. It's really about how much you love books. This is what is going to pay off later on. Can you share with your child, assuming that you have the love of books yourself, can you share that with your child? Can you make that something they want to do when they're on their own and have nothing to do? If it takes them until they're 4, 5, 6, or 7 to be able to decode sounds into set letters into sound, to me that doesn't matter that much. If at age 10 they love books, they can't wait to get to the end of it, this is what's going to make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's funny. Yeah, like everything you're talking about has a personal touch for me today, because yeah, I have a child just like that who wasn't reading for a very long time. He started reading after his 7th birthday, and now he's 11, and he's the biggest reader. He reads really complex philosophical things that are really difficult. And what was interesting as well was that once it clicked in 3 languages at the same time, and it clicked also in music.
Oh,
The music teacher said something has happened. He suddenly decodes, and so probably he was going a roundabout way that other people usually don't take, but that roundabout way actually allowed him to apply whatever he was learning there to lots of different things. And this is just to say, it's you can see it in action, and it's really wonderful. So
Yeah.
it's encouraging. Mm.
It's not a race. It's not a sprint. It's a really really long marathon. Learning, like academic learning is. I mean, so
Yes.
it doesn't matter how quickly you start. Sometimes we have to forget the timetable that we've set up for a child and follow their lead, follow their interest, making sure they're progressing, but making sure they're doing so while still loving learning, because this love of learning, this is what will make the difference in the long run. Not so much whether you could teach that in 6 months or in 12 or in 3 years.
Yeah. So how do we get kids ready for school? Let's make sure they love learning,
Yes, yes.
basically. Yes, and that applies to language. It applies to so many other things as well, right?
Yes, definitely. And in oral language, I would say the same thing. So, for example, when children make a grammatical mistake, like let's say they're always making the same mistake in their sentence, it's not really about saying, I will not respond to you until you do that correctly. It's just about providing the correct form. So you can repeat the sentence. It's like, oh, I don't have an example, but
Yeah, taking.
like for example, my kids, because they speak French at home, English at school, they always put the adjective before the noun when they're speaking French, while most of the time it's the other way around. So if they're saying to me, ma préférée couleur, so my favorite color, so
Yeah.
word for word translation for English. So I will say, oh yes, ta couleur préférée, and then continue with the interaction. So the important is really to continue with the interaction, keep that the focus. You're providing the model, but you're continuing with the communication and the interaction. Instead of saying, stopping the whole thing, saying, no, that's not the way you say this, you should say it like this. Of course, it takes time. Of course, you need to be patient. Sometimes you provide the model like 250 times, and 251st, the next time it's still the same. But it's about interaction and communication, not about correction in teaching.
Yeah. And if you do the correction and teaching, you stop the communication, which is the first thing that will it will basically enable me to have more chances to give the right model, because at some point, if it's not nice to stick around to talk to me because I keep correcting, we're going to talk less, and then there's going to be much less opportunities for me to actually give my knowledge to them. And yeah, it needs to be fun to talk to your parents if you want to talk a lot, and that's the way we can pass on
Yeah.
whatever we want to pass on.
Yeah, exactly. It's not fun if it feels like an oral exam every time you want to tell your parents about what happened at nursery. So they need to be there in the moment and really listen to what it is you're going to say. You're trying to explain what it is that happened, what was so wonderful or awful at nursery.
Yeah.
And then they can, in passing, offer a model for where the child made a mistake, but it should not be about the mistake. It should really be about the communication.
This is such a good idea, such a good thought on which to end our week, our talk now, and then kind of to have inspiration for the weekend. If we have toddlers at home or children any age, really, to kind of open up that channel of communication and actually care about what they're telling us much more than about how they are telling us whether it's the correct grammatical structure or not.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we often read in books that first language acquisition is effortless, and I don't think it is. I think if you've ever seen a toddler so frustrated because you don't understand what they mean. I think they invest a lot of effort in first language acquisition, and I think we should support them and encourage them by providing the social feedback that they're after.
Thank you so much, Evelyne. This has been a really interesting and informative conversation. And we wish you a wonderful weekend, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyne. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.